Well, to put some colour to the latest jobs numbers, I'm joined in studio by Xhanti Payi. He's an economist at Nassim Research Insights. Thank you for joining us, sir.
My pleasure.
Now, a net total of 42,000 jobs created, a mere 0.5 percentage point increase. Is this something that we should be excited about, or is very disappointing?
Look, really not in the long term, and especially if we look at the other number, where we look in terms of what has happened over the year. Look, I tend to think that you want to look at more trend bases than just the small numbers. Remember, these numbers only represent just until December, so there was obviously that a lot of activity in terms of that last part. So when you think about trade, where those numbers came from, that's where, you know, the Christmas period and everybody's excited. So it really don't represent much more than just, you know, that probably that last quarter that was quite exciting, given obviously the festive season. And one of the things that's interesting in these numbers and this particular survey is that it looks at companies that are much more, like, these are registered companies that pay VAT. And some of the dynamics there are quite interesting, particularly because they don't look into the informal sectors and the other things that are probably happening, where there are some struggles outside the more formal VAT paying and, you know, established businesses.
Now, in terms of the average earnings, as I alluded to in the insert there, those rose by the average rose by 7.6%. That's really not much when you take inflation into account, is it?
Indeed, and I think if you look at the sectors that actually gave you that, so that was what mainly the government sector, which is this social services, but really represents government, which obviously has tended to pay slightly more in terms of the increases. And you also look at the manufacturing sector, but the interesting trend in that is that as the earnings have gone up in the manufacturing sectors, if you look on an annual basis what has happened to jobs, that has actually dropped. And it seems to give us this idea that as you have increased the earnings, we've lost some jobs. So, you know, companies are paying a little bit more in terms of their earnings to employees, but at the same time they are taking away those jobs, so they're cutting down on jobs. And I think you can see that in some of the profitability. So these companies are increasing some of the profits, but only because they're actually firing more people, and those are the numbers that we're seeing on an annual basis in the various sectors.
It's interesting that you touched on the issue of government. They have been telling us, or at least in Nhlanhla have said that they're putting the brakes on employing new people. And it's interesting to see, even though they created 59,000 jobs in the year to December, they only created 1,000 jobs in the fourth quarter.
Yes, indeed. I think that is starting to show a little bit, but in the earnings itself, not so much. And I think, as you see, and that's something that's going to be quite interesting to watch over time, whether or not they can put the lid on that. We can already sing in, you know, municipal employees on strike. There's already a little bit of violence that's coming through there. So it's going to be interesting how that dynamic works, and it's one that we have to watch, because obviously it's got very strong implications in terms of the ratings in South Africa and how we actually keep spending in check and growth itself.
Government keeps on talking about how we need to reindustrialize South Africa and so on and so forth. But when we look at these numbers in terms of the sectors that are doing well, we see that our productive side is really struggling, and it seems to be the services side that's holding things up. Indeed,
and I think we saw the numbers, for example, in terms of production, manufacturing production, and we saw mining production coming out, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. And those numbers showed consistently that these are sectors that are thinning, you know, so they're becoming much smaller. So the reindustrialization probably looks like it's not really working out, and I think we need to actually work very, very hard at actually, you know, changing that trend. But certainly these numbers in terms of employment in manufacturing and mining are contracting, and we've seen that the same trend happened in terms of the production in those sectors has contracted, even the sales. And on a trend basis, particularly in mining, where that has happened over consecutive periods. So there is a lot of problems in terms of some of these industries that are quite strong. You're actually even seeing it in the services sectors, where we always gained a lot of jobs in terms of, you know, the banking sector and financial services, that they're not as strong in terms of hiring and growing as they have been in previous years.
Where does this leave our national blueprint, the National Development Plan? We were supposed to create 5 million jobs between 2011 and 2020. Jobs are not being created, they're being lost. So Does this make this idea a farce?
Look, there are various things that we're not doing, and our view has been that we are not bold enough. We're not going where we should be going. Looking at our economy for its own structure, I think there's been a lot of looking outside. But one of the things that are happening is that we are being affected very strongly by the actions of other people. If you look, for example, at things like the South African rand, it has weakened substantially, and we probably will see that in the inflation numbers that are coming through. We're seeing some of these things where people are struggling in the business environment. We're saying, what are we doing? What is the government doing? And what are the private companies in terms of confidence, in terms of investment? Those numbers are not coming through, which is what we should be seeing. And there are various things that we should be doing in terms of actually coordinating what should be happening in terms of national development plan. So there are some things that we are doing, maybe a little bit trims on the edges, but we need something consistent. We need something that's quite bold and quite strong. At the same time, we need to sequence it properly so that we make sure that all the things that we need to do in investment, in the currency, in government action, in labor relations, in particularly, obviously, some of the problems that have been happening in the power sector. So all these things have to work together. And I think one of the problems that we're facing is that all these things that should work together are not. And these are some of the problems, excluding even some of the problems that obviously our investment partners and our trade partners themselves are facing.
There is so much more to talk about, electricity, etc., but we're going to have to leave it. Thank you very much for your time. That was Xhanti Payi. He's an economist at Nassim Research Insights.